Welcome everybody to tonight's or today's webinar presented to you by the World Toad Association. Tonight's webinar crosses a number of territories across the globe, and we're lucky to have 4 speakers join us tonight for this webinar. The title of the webinar is The Changing Gambling Legislation in Different Territories. And as you know, this is a topic of vital interest right across the globe, because this area is quite a dynamic area in changing the way people look at the regulation of the gambling industry, no matter what country you reside in, and no matter how you bet or engage in gambling activities. Tonight, we've got speakers from 4 countries. Shortly, I'll introduce Joel Williams from Tabcorp in Australia. We'll be followed by Susanna Gill from the UK Tote, obviously from the UK. Suresh Palidugu from North Alley in India. And our final presenter is Juha Angelini from Veikkaus in Finland. So with that further ado, I'll hand over to Joel Williams with his discussion. Over to you, Joel.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. Just by way of background, so I've been operating in the gaming wagering space in Australia now for just over 30 years, predominantly with Tabcorp. Currently the General Manager of Regulatory Affairs there, across 7 different jurisdictions across Australia. Prior to this, I was actually working in the Victorian government for 12 years. And the last couple of years of that was Executive Director of Gaming and Liquor, presiding over all the different policy settings for gaming, wagering, etc. And in particular, I also set up and monitored and in charge of the Royal Commission into Crown Casino in Melbourne. So very familiar as to the changing landscape from a regulatory perspective. You'll notice a key theme during my talk, and I'm not going to talk for that long, but a key theme is the change, and the trigger of change is because of the Royal Commissions. And what we've seen is a significant change in the way in which all the different jurisdictions are regulating terrestrial gaming, wagering, etc. And we've seen that change rapidly occur and shift as an outcome of those regulations, those Royal Commissions, and in particular in 2 key areas, one being zero tolerance to compliance, and the other one being particularly around responsible gaming. By change, I mean prior to the Royal Commissions, it'd be fair to say that a lot of the power existed with industry. And by that I mean, and I'm talking from when I was in government, a perfect example would be is that up on the whiteboard, you know, every year we would look at the types of regulatory changes that we wanted to bring in. We would have a menu, a wish list, particularly around responsible gaming. And for political reasons, and because of the key lobbying by industry, etc., very few would get up. Now, I would argue that the position of power has definitely changed, and I believe for the right reasons, by the way. I think the decision makers, i.e. the policy makers, government, regulation, now have the power, and they're certainly changing regulations at pace. And it is extremely difficult for industry, and what we're noticing in Australia is our ability to keep pace with those change of regulations. In particular, historically, you know, it was industry's responsibility to ensure that we comply with those regulatory obligations, whether or not they be in the Act, whether or not they be in a form of another legislative type instrument. Now we're seeing language come out, in particular in Victoria in Australia, and it's all around social license responsibilities and industry demonstrating what are they doing over and above those regulatory obligations. And that's very difficult because as an industry, we're very used to seeing a requirement, whether or not they be in technical standards or they be in some form of other regulatory type instrument, and ensuring that from a legislative perspective, we are complying to that requirement. As I mentioned, now we are expected to go beyond that. And that's part of the challenge that we've got, particularly in Australia, is how we define that. Regulators are basically pushing it back to us to try and figure that out. And again, in particular from a responsible gaming perspective. It's just not acceptable anymore from their lens for us to be regulatory compliant. We've got to be able to be seen to be doing more, particularly around that social license component. And this is new terminology for everyone. So I think that everyone is trying to keep pace and figure it out. And again, part of the challenge that we've got as an industry. Once upon a time, I would have argued, particularly when I was sitting over in government, I would have argued that the regulators, the decision makers in government were behind the 8 ball and industry was far ahead. And in particular, because of some of the revenues that they were able to generate and some of the products that they were able to bring to the table, etc. I'd argue it's not the case anymore. Again, it goes back to our ability to keep pace with where regulation is in Australia. And I think that as an industry, we've probably been caught napping a little bit. Historically, a long time ago, as you're all aware, we used to talk around problem gambling. Then the language changed and we then talked about responsible gambling. And now they're talking about safer gambling. And that's put us as industry in quite a challenging position, again, trying to understand the nuance of the change of language that they're using, but more importantly, how we see that social license responsibility and how we make changes internally to ensure that we are delivering to regulatory expectations, etc. But some of the challenge for us as an industry is what do we actually do about that? The one thing that I am certain of is that given this change in the way in which the regulators have position of power now, and again, I think that that's a good thing, but it's our ability to keep pace, as I mentioned before, but I don't think it's going to change. I think that as we progress, the level of regulations will get more and more. I think that there is a breakdown of trust as an outcome of the Royal Commissions. And yes, the Royal Commissions were in particularly focused on the casinos, Star City Casino in Sydney, Crown Casino in both Sydney, Melbourne and Perth, Western Australia. But the reality is that a lot of the outcomes and findings of those Royal Commissions are now being pushed out to terrestrial wagering, terrestrial gaming, pub and club land, etc. One of my concerns is, and conversations we're having with the regulators, is that we may very well go back and see it back to an era whereby requirements were very prescriptive instead of being principle-based. And that's a challenge for us, as you know, because particularly around technical standards, they tend, when they are overly prescriptive, they tend to describe the solution rather than prescribing the outcome that the regulator want to see. And that's a challenge for industry because industry like to be innovative. They don't want to be constrained by the way in which either the Act or regulations require them to be constrained with because of being overly prescriptive by way of a solution, etc. When I was in government, one of my common sayings was that industry are subject matter experts, and the lack of engagement by industry will result in the regulators and the decision makers, the policy makers, etc., becoming the subject matter experts. And that's a fair bit of danger for industry, I see. Again, the moment the industry becomes the moment the regulators and policy makers become subject matter experts, I think that's when we start to see those prescribed requirements that becomes very challenging for industry, etc. I think that we are challenged, especially in Australia. We are challenged, as I mentioned before, to keep pace. I think it's only going to get tougher for us to a certain point. As we all know, there is very much a line with how far the regulators can go. But we do take it very seriously in Australia with regards to, in particular, how they see our obligations towards responsible gaming at the moment. They want us to work the solutions out, which, yep, we probably agree. However, I think part of the challenge for us is again, how fast we need to keep pace with their expectations, how quickly we can find those solutions, and how quickly we can implement those solutions and try and get ahead of their expectations, etc. Paul, that's probably all I had. Obviously, there will be question time at some point in time, and happy to answer any questions that come up.
Thank you, Joel. It's quite an interesting area. Even as I'm talking to you, it raised a few questions. So if anyone watching the webinar has any questions, we'll do the Q&A at the end of the session after the last speaker has concluded their presentation. All right, thanks, Joel. Over to Susanna Gill now from the UK Tote.
Good morning, afternoon and evening, everyone. Thank you, Paul. Very pleased to be here to follow on and talk about the UK. Just for anyone who doesn't know me, I've been part of the Tote group for 5.5 years now, since we bought the Totes. And before that, I worked for racecourses and in betting for Betfair, and started my career in politics. So hopefully I know a little bit about politics, horse racing and betting, which is rather useful for this conversation, because all three of them will come up. And there's lots of parallels between what's going on in Australia and the sort of similar themes in the UK. So I have a presentation, so I am going to hopefully share my screen, and this is all going to work seamlessly. Here we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. I will put it into slideshow mode. So there we go. I am going to just run through some of the key things that have happened in the UK over the last few years. And like Joel, look at the sort of future direction of travel of where our industry is going. So just to set the scene, if everyone knows lots about the UK market, apologies if I'm going over things you know, but I thought it would be good to just go over some of the basics. So in the UK, we are regulated by the 2005 Gambling Act. And in that, there are 3 very specific licensing objectives, and that is to prevent gambling being a source of crime and disorder, to conduct gambling in a fair and open way, and to protect children and vulnerable people. And every conversation and every part of the debate goes back to those 3 principles, and that's the sort of operations, the approach that the Gambling Commission take, who are the UK industry regulator. They have to come back to achieving those 3 licensing objectives. They report into the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, which is quite a fluid department in our country. It's one that's changed size and shape quite often, and it also has a very interesting remit beyond gambling and sport. It's responsible, for example, for the Olympics when we hosted them in 2012. And lots of the creatives and cultural industries as well. So a big remit for a small department. And we have a very stable environment in terms of the Gambling Commission has been in place for a long time, as has the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. However, there was in recent years a feeling that the 2005 Gambling Act needed reviewing, and to quote the commitment that came from the Conservative Party, who have been in power since 2010, that it's increasingly becoming an analog law in a digital age. So in 2019, they committed to reviewing it and changing it. No one knew quite how, though, but we knew that we were entering a period of some change and discussion in regulation. So no one needs to memorize these, or if you are interested, I'm very happy that Florence circulates these slides after this presentation. But some of the key things that have happened over the last 3 years include the commitment to review the Act. We've then had a round of consultation in 2001. And then finally, after much delay, primarily because of COVID, but also because of being quite a difficult issue for the government to get a handle on, because of a wide range of views, again similar to the debate that's going on in Australia at the moment, we finally had a gambling white paper published this year in April. It's called High Stakes Gambling Reform for the Digital Age, and it set out some of the principles and changes that the government wanted to see. and we would then enter a round of consultations to see how those changes would be implemented. So just as the summer holidays hit in July, as you can see down the right-hand column, we had a number of consultations go live, all very, very detailed. Two of the probably most interesting areas were the changes that are being proposed on marketing, which I'll come back to those, but that was very interesting. And also the most, probably one that was most under debate and of most interest was the remote gambling and the financial vulnerability and risk checks and the proposals that were put forward there, which again, I'll come back to. And then DCMS also had led on some consultations. So everyone involved in gambling here has been incredibly busy responding to lots of consultations. I say I will come back to what those key areas are, but no shortage of things to do if you're working with government. This is just a slide to show the environment that we've been working under. We have had the same party in power, the Conservatives in power, but we have had 3 prime ministers since the commitment to change the 2005 Gambling Act. We've had 5 secretaries of state, so the leads at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and we've had 9 ministers in charge of sport and gambling. I say it's a department that is known for a lot of change. Every time there's a government reshuffle, there tends to be a new minister for gambling and sport, and it's quite hard work for everyone to get to know those people. You build up contacts and then you're on to the next person, and I hear that there will be another reshuffle before a general election at some point in 2024. So the debate remains the same, but the people that we're talking to in government change a lot, and I'm sure we're not the only country to experience that, but it's just the nature of having the debate with government that it is ever changing. So we've looked at the sort of political side. On the regulatory side, we have, as I say, the Gambling Commission who operate in Birmingham. They're a team of about 300 people. We've actually got a couple of members of our own team now at the TOTE who did work at the Gambling Commission, which is incredibly helpful and great knowledge of how the regulator works. They've had a new chief executive in post since 2021, Andrew Rhodes, who's very much showing some very strong leadership and some clear views on how he sees the regulator working in future. They don't at the moment, interestingly, and this is very much a theme for WoTA, the Gambling Commission do not differentiate between different types of gambling very much. If you're looking at the consultations and the areas we're discussing, sports betting, gaming, indeed pool betting, it tends to all be lumped into together, and any controls or changes are all discussed as one, as opposed to saying, well, hang on, sports betting and pool betting is something different to gaming. It's part of the debate, but it's not something that the Gambling Commission have acted on. And as I come on to look at some of the key areas for debate, sometimes the debate in the UK has become quite fierce between the different sides. So as Joel said, actually, those that are advocating for change in Australia and the debate have very much grown a voice, and that's the same here in the UK. So most recently, we've seen the Gambling Commission and the Racing Post have a very interesting debate about the impact of proposed changes on the racing industry. And I've not seen a regulator take such an aggressive approach with a media outlet before here, which just goes to show how interesting the debate is on some of the changes. And what we have definitely seen over the last couple of years is some very strong regulatory enforcement when operators have been seen to fail in their duties, either towards anti-money laundering or particularly social responsibility and safer gambling. Just a few examples there of some of the biggest fines we've had. Entain were fined 17 million in 2022, only to be overtaken by William Hill being fined over 19 million last year. 888 were fined, and then In Touch Games, actually, after a number of fines, finally had their license suspended. So I think that it's very, very clear that the Gambling Commission have been criticised by some politicians for not taking enough action against the industry, and are now very much the other way. So it's very important to have a positive and good relationship with the regulator, because they will take enforcement action if needed. So really, just the final detail bit from me is these are some of the key areas that are under discussion in the UK at the moment. The most controversial, I would say, are the financial risk checks. So these are all under consultation, so nothing's been decided. And in fact, many of the checks and balances we have to look at as an operator, looking after our customers, are already in place. But these are some of the checks that the Gambling Commission are proposing are put in place on a more formal basis. So particularly a soft check, it's being called, for those losing £125 within a rolling 30-day period, and then a more stringent check if you lose £1,000 within a 24-hour rolling period. So we've just responded to that consultation. There are strong views on either side of the debate about whether it goes far enough, or in fact, particularly from a racing perspective, it goes too far, because if you have a period where, for example, you have the Cheltenham Festival here, which you have 4 great days of jump racing. Actually, people will spend a lot more during that week, and it doesn't mean they're at risk of problem gambling. It's because they're betting on racing that week, the same way they're booking into a hotel and spending money on travel and accommodation, etc. So it will be interesting to see how the Gambling Commission review I think they had over 20,000 responses to that consultation, and what comes out of it. Equally interesting in the marketing restrictions they're talking about. They want operators to be more specific about the opt-in consent that we take from our customers. So rather than a blanket consent, you do it by platform, so gaming, sports betting separately. That's probably more workable at the moment, and fairly sensible. DCMS have also just closed a consultation on online slots. So if you walk into a bookmaker's here in the UK, what are called fixed odds betting terminals operate at £2 per go, and there's a consultation to whether to bring that online in the UK, so it'd be £2 or anything up to £15. So the general feel is the government may well end up going for sort of £5 online, but we'll wait to see that one as well. And then if that wasn't enough, last week when I just finished these slides, we also got the consultation on a statutory levy for education treatment, research, education, treatment, which is now actually going to be called research, prevention and treatment. So at the moment, there is a voluntary levy based on 0.1% of gross gambling yield, and this would then become a statutory levy that was required under your licence to pay, and probably come in at 1%, with the money, rather than it being handled by a third party called GamCare, it would go to the regulator, the Gambling Commission, and then into the NHS, the National Health Service, to then share the money out for research, prevention and treatment. So again, some interesting views on that side. I think everyone agrees that making it statutory is probably sensible. It's then a case of how best to use the funds. So as you can see, some big political issues being discussed in the UK. And I will try now and bring these together into have a bit of a prediction about what's going to happen in future. I don't think there's going to be any revolutions. We have very strong debates on either side of the industry. However, everything does have to be agreed. The government with the DCMS and the Gambling Commission do have to operate under a consensus. So I can't see anything violently different happening, but the debate will definitely continue. We're still a very mature, stable market, the biggest online gambling market in the world, and that isn't going to change. And as I linked with the point about no revolutions, every change will have to be done through consensus as part of the democracy that we live in. So, and the theme of all the issues that we're discussing gambling can feel very specific to the sector, but actually it's all part of the digital age we live in, about freedoms and responsibilities and versus protections of the individual. So if you like, gambling is just part of the debate we're having about freedom of speech online and what protections there need to be in place. And it's all part of the conversation in a digital age. So I think sometimes we should look at it less specifically as gambling and more really about the modern world. And I can be very sure that the debate will continue. And I'll just finish with a quote from Tim Miller, who is the Executive Director at the Gambling Commission. and he was speaking at the Global Gambling Expo on the 10th of October, so 2 weeks ago, and I thought this nicely summed up how things will progress in the UK. He said, "So what is clear is that despite the well-established and mature market, gambling regulation in Britain will not be standing still over the next few years. Our commitment to making gambling safer, fairer, and crime-free will continue, but our regulatory approach will continue to adapt and evolve and respond to new challenges, to new innovations, to new opportunities." And I think that's a nice way to finish. And hopefully, if anyone's got any questions, I'm very happy to answer them when we get to the questions part of the webinar. So back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Susanna, and most comprehensive analysis of what's happening in the UK market. And I'm sure there'll be a stack of questions asked by all the participants at the end of the webinar. Thank you again. All right, let's move over to India now, and Suresh, let's hear from you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. And thank you, Paul, for having me on this webinar. A little brief on myself. Been in Indian racing industry for last 10 years, and I work with all the race clubs. To start off on the technical front, but as things are progressing, I've been working very closely with Turf Authorities of India and individual clubs on taxation issues or anything pertaining to racing, and specifically on the totalizator systems and things like that. Let me share my screen here. Hope it's visible. Okay. Main points that I'd like to stress on, especially when coming to taxation and its implication. There's a lot happening in India in terms of gaming, gambling, skill-based, non-skill-based. So to give you a very high-level perspective, we don't have, we have multiple layers rather. That is, we have a state-level regulation, then we have a central level, and also in terms of a regulatory perspective, each state, we have 28 states and 8 union territories. So each have their own gambling act and gambling rules and regulations, under which current number of clubs we have in India. We're talking about 7 clubs, and each of them in different states. So each operate under the state law at the same time. In terms of GSTs and taxation, it comes under the central purview. So definitely there's a lot of collisions in terms of how things need to be structured. Coming to horse racing, it has always enjoyed a special status of an skill-based game and was not part of a gambling purview. And there were, in terms of regulation, there was 194 BB in terms of taxations. And the new change that is happening in the last 1 year is significant in terms of both the taxation and in terms of how horse racing and gaming is being viewed. The latest bill that came up in 2023, that is in April, had significant impacts for the future of gaming in India. And first time the definition of online gaming has come into play. And previously there was a lot of fine lines that people were using both ways, in a positive way, and of course the way that we would not like to do. But so that is 194 BB, and the new finance bill has clarified a lot of aspects in terms of what comes under online gaming, the definitions of skill-based and non-skill-based, and the line has been slightly removed. And in terms of finance bill, let me give you a, okay. So 194B, 194, I'm not going to go into technicalities, but the bill at a high level brings horse racing and all of the casinos, everything under one umbrella, at least in terms of definitions, which has a greater impact on how everything will be perceived. So irrespective of whether it is skill-based or non-skill-based, the taxation rules are being made uniform. Again, the current GST terms say it's a 28% GST on the turnover, not on the GGR. There was different ways people were interpreting, and certain racing industry was pretty much following the 28% GST from the day it was initiated back in 2016. But most of the other sectors were following a GGR model, but now everything has been clearly articulated, and now everything comes under 28% GST. Now, the other major change that has come this year is the TDS, that is tax deduction at source. That is, on the winnings also, there is a 30% deduction on the winnings, which is a big blow, especially from horse racing industry, where I have clear numbers. I would say more than GST, TDS has created a bigger impact, negative impact in terms of overall volume of transactions that has been happening. So that's primary. And now, in terms of current state with the race clubs and industry as such, there is definitely a lot of confusion back and forth, because law has been just introduced, and all the clubs, independent clubs, due to the state and central regulation, both on taxation is one side, the other side is overall online, offline regulation. So these needs to be clarified as we go, and clubs are seeking legal support, both from GST perspective, and also how offline, online has to be treated. Because there is a confusion in terms of online game itself, whether it's something which is produced online or actual races can be termed as online games. So there's a lot of debate going on internally, both within the racing industry and also outside, on these significant changes, I would say. And with all this backdrop, we do have, from India, we have political stability overall. But from the gambling standpoint, some of the major changes that are happening, government has asked organizations to, or gaming industry, to come with self-regulatory body. That is, so far that was not there. Of course, like for example, Turf Authority India was a self-regulatory body independently, but not under the purview of a government blessing or an independent body. It's more of a racing industry body. Now government has asked gaming industry to have their own self-regulatory and create rules of operations so that that can be protected across the board. Again, that's still very new. That came up this year, and self-regulatory bodies have, a couple of them have applied for the status, and it's still in the application state, not yet fully formed. But these are the initiatives that are happening in India. Good thing, government has taken note of such a vast industry, and they're taking measures to try and get it under a common regulation as much as possible, which is a good sign. But yet, it's a lot of confusion and a lot of taxation levied on regular gaming players at this point of time. So it's not looking good at this hour, but from the government standpoint, it is looking at very deep to try and understand where to draw line and how to really provide an environment where things can stabilize as we go. But during the stabilization process, a lot of businesses, race clubs to be more precise, are getting affected. So that's an update from my side. I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of the session. Okay. Thank you. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Suresh. It's most interesting in India with the, we'll have questions at the end, so I'm sure there'll be plenty. So for those who are watching, make sure you get ready for those questions at the end of the webinar. So thank you, Suresh. All right, let's go to our final speaker. Juha, over to you from Finland.
Okay, hello. Could you, Florence, start the presentation? Thank you. Yes, hello, my name is Juha and I have been around 13 years in top business, or almost straight from school's chair. I have answered now 7 years the top business in Finland. Thank you very much for opportunity to come here to present the gambling legislation situation and the need to change in Finland. So yeah, the Finnish gambling system is based on monopoly, and its goal is to provide gambling responsibly and minimize potential harm from gambling and provide funds for Finnish state. With this, Finnish state funds various associations and sports like horse racing. Veikkaus offers diverse range of gaming options, including lotteries, slot machines on point of sales, online casino, and betting. And to ensure fair and lawful gaming practices, Veikkaus operates under framework of Lottery Act and the government decree. These regulations covers important aspects such as payout percentage for games, the type and maximum quantities of slot machines and casino games, the maximum number of specialized gaming halls and locations, and operating hours of gaming establishments. Additionally, each game is governed by its own set of rules, subject to approval by the Ministry of Interior. Supervision of Veikkaus gaming activities falls under the purview of Police Board. Their role encompasses gaming operations and ensures the legal compliance marketing. The Police Board plays a critical role approving gaming systems and maintaining real-time oversight for sport and horse betting and lottery games. It is responsible for monitoring and calculating pools and betting results. In Finland, gambling is heavily regulated, and Veikkaus is at the moment the only legit betting operator. Florence, next slide, please. In recent times, the landscape of gambling has witnessed a significant shift towards digital channels. This shift has been reduction in the gaming revenues generated by our ATMs in physical locations, largely due our responsibility gaming measures put in place. For the current year, Finland gambling revenue stands at approximately 1.6 billion euros. This revenue is contributed as 1/3 delivered from Veikkaus physical channel, 1/3 from Veikkaus digital channel, and the remaining 1/3 from digital channels outside of the monopoly system. This means that digital channels contribute to this 2/3 of total gaming margin in Finland. About half of the entire gaming market in Finland, which is equivalent to 800 million, comes from competitive digital gaming, including betting and online casinos. All the growth in Finnish gaming market is happening in this specific area, and it's happening to channels that are not controlled by the government monopoly system, and that's why the government doesn't get any GTR from the betting outside of the system. According to the population surveys, about 60% of gaming problems are caused by this competitive gaming sector, and it's growing rapidly in Finland. Next slide, please. The monopoly system has been a functional way to organize gambling in Finland a very long time. It has a good history, and the European Commission has approved it, and it meets the requirements of the European Court of Justice. In order to work, the monopoly system must be genuine. The market has developed. The market development has been varying. The market share has been declining for a long time, and the decline has accelerated even more. In digital channel, it is approaching the critical limit of 50%, and our total market share is predicted to be 68% this year, and on digital only 52%. And in the most competitive market, betting and online casinos, the share is already clearly less than half. Next slide, please. New government program includes clear entry to the transition to licensing system from the beginning of 2026 at the latest. The reform aims to prevent and reduce the negative health, economic, and social consequences associated with gambling. Additionally, it seeks to improve the channeling rate of the gaming system. In view of the timetable and the scope of the reform, legislative work must be launched as a matter of urgent. The key objective of the reform must be, what we think, the widest possible coverage of licensed gambling offers and high channeling rate for the system, at least 90%. And how to get to this goal? The tax rate must be designed well to facilitate the effectiveness of regulated gambling system. It should be set level that encourage operators to participate in the legal licensing framework rather than resourcing under regulated illegal alternatives. Secondly, it should ensure the tax revenues generated from licensed operators sustain enough to fund important aspects of the regulatory system as the horse racing. Granting operators the freedom to engage in market activities within well-refined regulatory boundaries is essential for successful licensing system. Operators need the possibility to promote their services, attract customers, and compete with unlicensed offshore operators. However, this marketing should be subject to strict guidelines to prevent unethical practices. And introducing company-specified loss limits means tailoring responsible gaming measures to individual circumstances and behavior of each gambling operator. Rather than applying one-size-fits-all approach, this strategy enables companies to assess their customers' gaming patterns and financial situation and set limits accordingly. Gambling companies should have legal obligation to actively monitor and recognize abnormal gaming behavior in their customers. The obligation ensures the gambling companies take an active role in practicing their customers' promoting responsible gaming practices. Regulatory authorities need robust legal and enforcement tools to combat with unlicensed gambling operators. Strong regulated tools are critical for maintaining the integrity and the licensed gambling system and protecting customers and ensure compliance with the legal and ethical standards with the industry. It also serves to deter unlicensed operators from entering the market or continuing their illegal activities. The current system is capable of channeling about half of digital gambling. The new system must be able to achieve better results. This is also the way to prevent gambling harms in Finland. Next slide, please. From tote and horse racing side, there's no channeling problem in tote betting. However, the licensing market opens up the possibility for the division of tote betting pools, which is not the interest of sport players or gaming companies. This raises the question how to fund Finnish racing in the licensed market. Currently, Finnish racing receives its funds from the owner of Veikkaus, the Finnish state, and Veikkaus will continue to arranging our own tote pools in sport and tote in the licensed market. However, the licensed market, the horse racing industry must find other sources also for the income, and it is the responsibility of the horse racing industry to do so. Thank you very much. Back to the studio, Paul.
Back to the studio. Thanks, you are very interesting. And so let's open up now for the questions and hopefully some good answers. I can see the number of participants has stayed pretty consistent throughout our webinar, so it's good to see people are staying on to listen to the questions. I might fire a question at you. You talked about the splitting of the tote pools, and we've seen that happen in France. Are you taking any lessons from what's happened in France with the splitting of the tote pools?
Actually, I was referring that if we have multiple operators in Finland, and
right,
that splits the pools.
Right.
The Veikkaus will arrange only one pool.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Now, whilst we're waiting for some Q&A questions to come through, I haven't seen any yet. I might go back to Joel Williams from Tabcorp in Australia. Joel, you mentioned that that the industry needs to keep ahead of the regulator. Can you give us some advice about how we could achieve that? You're on mute, by the way.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, okay, cool. So when I was in government, again, look, I was always a big believer that industry should be engaging and getting on the front foot and discussing their pipeline of work as much as they can with the regulator. I don't think it's done enough. I don't think it's done as in a proactive way enough, certainly when you look at emerging and new technology. And so I think that there is always a level of resistance by industry to engage with regulators because fearful of the fact of being told no. And therefore, potentially that creates a bit of a delay in that technology coming through. So look, I'm just a big believer, again, in industry getting on the front foot, engaging as much as they can, trying to influence some of those requirements that are going to be documented into the future. Also an opportunity to clean up some of those requirements that may be potential grey areas that might be causing problems for them today. Again, I go back to if industry aren't engaging with regulators as the subject matter experts, the regulators and policymakers become the subject matter experts overnight, and that's not always a great thing.
Yes, no, granted.
Paul,
Cool.
can I just add to that from a UK?
Sure.
I think it's exactly the same here. I mean, as a mature gambling market, issues that come up in gambling are just a problem for politicians, and the industry looks difficult. It causes debate. Some people say there are too many controls and restrictions are being put in place for people wanting to bet in a perfectly ordinary, reasonable fashion. Other people say there aren't enough controls. And if you're a politician sat in the middle of this, the gambling industry can look like a problem. And the more we can, as Joel said, come up with solutions and solve things ourselves. So for example, there's work going on in the UK about the single customer view. So if you're a customer with multiple betting accounts, how can operators work together within the remits of what's allowed from information sharing, etc., to actually have a single customer view of what your position is across your multiple accounts. And indeed, one of the areas the industry here is trying to fix itself is the creation. That isn't being led by DCMS, that's been thrown to the Betting and Gaming Council here and all of us in the industry to try and create one. So like Joel said, the more we can try and help government and solve problems rather than be a problem, I think the better. And then if we can share best practice across our different nations, as we do here through WoTA, that can only be useful for all of us.
Yes, well said, Susanna. And whilst you've got the floor, I noticed there were some surveys taken by the Racing Post. What's the reaction from customers to these changes in regulation?
So in the racing industry, the changes are very strongly opposed to some of the proposals being put forward. We tend to have, as a racing industry, an older customer base, people who may be retired or heading towards that way. They're homeowners, they feel they've got savings, they don't want people telling them how much they can and can't bet. So when the racing industry and other racing bodies here led on a survey recently, they found that a lot of people had already experienced more checks than was being sort of estimated would be the case, and that they didn't like that approach. So as I was saying, there's just going to have to be a balance found somewhere as to what's put into regulatory change and what's left for consumers to decide what they think is appropriate for their own behaviour. It's not entirely straightforward issue.
No, I imagine not. Now, whilst you've got the floor, there's a question come through. What can the UK TOTE do to assist the 1.4 million problem gamblers that have been identified in the UK?
Well, I don't think we can do, as the TOTE, anything specific other than what all operators should be doing, which is absolutely implementing the higher standards for everything that we do. So, again, I think this has come up as a theme. It's not about just meeting the basic regulatory standards, but doing everything in a better way. And we're all learning about this. So whether it's doing checks on customers when they sign up, in terms of understanding their financial setup, obviously all the anti-money laundering checks which are required, but developing how we can understand our customers better. And there's not a perfect solution at the moment. There isn't a way of being able to check in a less intrusive manner about a customer's financial setup. We're all having to do that as operators, but as the TOTE, we're certainly building on our our compliance capabilities and just improving how we do things year on year, and not waiting for regulation and being told what to do, but doing it in an active way.
That's the sort of point Joel's been making too. Get in front, not behind. Cool. All right. Thanks, Susanna. We've got a question for you. In Finland, do you plan to offer fixed odds betting on horse racing?
Yeah, actually, we are already offering fixed odds couple of days of week to horse racing. But in Finland, we don't have precision to bet on horses on fixed odds, so it's not big business for us.
Right. Okay. And whilst you're on the floor, do you plan to build stronger cooperation with the operators in neighbour countries, or just be competitors?
The best possible way would be that we would have strong cooperation with the Nordic betting operators, but if that's not possible, we are also ready to be also only the competitors. But yeah, the best way would be that we would have good cooperation with other operators as well.
Okay, cool. And look, you're pretty popular on this chat forum, so here's another question for you. You have had the gaming monopoly in Finland for some years. What has happened in the illegal market since Vegas became the only legal operator? Since the total market has declined the last 5 years, has there been growth in the illegal market? And if yes, has it happened in sports betting, casino, or horse racing?
Yeah, there has been increase of in offshore market. The increase has happened in online casinos, fixed odds betting on sports, not that much in pari-mutuel horse betting.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Ewa. Over to Suresh. Suresh, a question for you. And I suppose it's an obvious answer, but Have you done any assessment about the impact of these changes coming through with the changes in legislation and the extra taxes on winnings?
Yes, we did analysis in terms of, see, that's an ongoing activity within each of the clubs. Impact in terms of the revenue and betting, as I previously mentioned, it has dropped down significantly. But to answer the question, yes, we are doing active analysis of what's the impact is. Obviously negative at this stage, but we're more in a watch and wait mechanism at this point, and also to leverage the slight advantage that has come as part of the online definition, that is to offset the losses of individual punters, where previously it was not there. There is a provision to offset the losses for each punter across the year, that is across the financial year, which is a positive thing as opposed to in the past. But that only states online and it doesn't talk about offline. So there is that slight confusion in terms of whether we should go across the board or not. So KYC regulations are being checked. So there are different angles to the same problem. KYC's tracking of punters on the offline world. How do we do? So that's ongoing. Yes, a lot of analysis and work is being done since the bill has just come out 3 months back, and we're on it.
Good. Okay. No worries. Thanks, Suresh. All right. Look, a final question for Joel and Susanna. I think there seems to be a consistent theme from a regulation point of view that the net is cast across gaming, wagering, and lotteries as though they're the same betting medium. Is there any advice about how to try and separate the three from a regulatory perspective?
Susanna, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I'm happy to say a few things. I think, yes, that's absolutely true. And I think it's a frustration for us because we see pool betting and what we offer on horse racing as our core product is very different to both, bookmakers offering and also gaming. The tote's been around for 100 years. The very nature of pool betting is that everyone's betting into a pool against each other. The operator is agnostic. Really crucially in the UK as well, we can welcome winning customers. Same would apply in Ireland. I can see Ross is watching that. You've got a situation where lots of bookmakers are restricting customers if they're seen to be too successful. We don't need to worry about that as pool betting. That's a really important differential for customers. And say from a regulator point of view, we're not opposing customers. It's a much more, if you like, lottery style bet, particularly when we get to world pools where we've got all the different operators working together around the world, creating huge pools where people can win through clever betting for small sums. And we definitely are working hard to try and differentiate that from gaming and the other sides of the industry that are not seen in such a good light. I think we're some years away from being in a situation where the regulator here in the UK actively does that. But I don't think it's an impossible thing, star to shoot for in the future. I think it should be front and center of certainly what WoTA are doing as an organisation.
Thank you. Thanks, Susanna. Joel?
Yeah, and in Australia, look, I think given that we've got multiple jurisdictions and each jurisdiction operates their own act, I think that there is good separation between gambling, gaming machine, wagering, and lotteries. In addition to that, I think that at a federal level, we have what's called the National Consumer Protection Framework, which in particular focuses on online wagering, which again provides a good separation in that area. I think as we progress, I think that different jurisdictions may very well look at separating the different areas of the acts a little bit better to tighten that and make it a little bit clearer. But I don't think it necessarily causes any issues for industry.
Right. Okay. And is it another example where the industry needs to be on the front foot?
Oh, absolutely, Paul. Yeah. Again, if there is any confusion there of their issues, again, the more that industry can get on the front foot and try and influence some of those changes to clean it up, the better they are.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Joel. All right. We've got looks like one final question, and it's directed to Suresh. Does the extra taxes also impact wagering on international races? And secondly, can you see race clubs importing more international racing?
Yes, there is a direct impact because even international races attract the same taxation. We've seen that effect in the last 6 months significantly. Yes, the answer is yes. And India is keen on importing races and in terms of trying to consolidate that as much as possible. I think once this current hurdle is resolved, hopefully in the next 6 months to 1 year, especially the clarity that is needed. Yes, there is a lot of demand and there is a lot of, I see, people asking for more content as we speak, because I'm in the middle of all this. So I keep getting a lot of requests. So there is demand, there is no second thoughts, there is population in terms of racing population. We're trying to keep them engaged as much as possible until this, taxation cloud passes through.
Yeah, cool. All right. Thank you, Suresh. Most important. I'm sure they'll be banging at your door to get some more international racing into India.
Yeah,
So thank you very much.
Thank
Yes,
you.
no problems. All right. Well, that concludes the questions. There are no more. Can I just thank on behalf of all those who are watching the webinar, to thank Joel, Susanna, Suresh, and Ewa for sparing the time and presenting some valuable information for people involved with the World Toad Association. So thank you and good night.